Talking about musicians being pricks, the worst example of that I ever saw in person was Keith Jarrett. Uh,
Ooh.
went to see Keith. You say, "Ooh, has he got a reputation? Has he?"
He just looks like like he comes across like someone who's completely incapable of having any human connection. So I just
Yeah,
picture him being like just kind of like just putting his hands out and like turning his hand away, like his face away, like don't touch me.
there was a couple of
But
things. We went to see him in this. It's a lovely venue actually. It suited him well. And the piano wasn't exactly on the stage. It was out a little bit into the audience, so it was quite good. It was a big theatre, a place called the Usher Hall in Edinburgh. So I a bit like the Albert Hall in London, that sort of vibe, but smaller. But so he played this beautiful concert, and just all the energy and that sort of beauty and stuff that he brings to his playing, and gosh, it was great. And the concert finished, and the audience, of course, asked for more, as you do. And he came back on, and it looked as though he was kind of grudgingly coming back on. And he played "Somewhere Over the Rainbow," I think, of his version of "Somewhere Over the Rainbow," which I thought was great because I love that song. And
it's a good song.
yeah, and more rapturous applause, and he went off. And now something strange happened, because normally when an artist's finished, when they're not willing to do any more, the house lights go up. That's the way it works. But on this in this venue on that day, the house lights were never really down because there was no light show. It was just Jarrett sitting at the piano. It was like a church gig or something like that. It was all very very suit and tie kind of thing. And so the house lights didn't move, and Jarrett came back on, and everybody, yeah, and he just stood there, and he didn't have a microphone, and he shouted to the audience. He just said, I'm paraphrasing here, he said, when you go to a restaurant and you have a lovely meal, and you have a lovely dessert after the meal, and you think that was a great meal, he says, do you then ask for another dessert? Because it's just too much. You can't have too much dessert. Good night. And he walked off, right? And there was kind of
a Roger Waters move.
Yeah, there was sort of like a scattering of applause and a kind of whoa, boo, and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so we went backstage, me and my friend Alan that I was in the band with. Alan had brought along a couple of CDs and wanted them signed. So we joined the queue at the dressing room, and there was a queue. It wasn't a gaggle, it was a queue. And the guy in front of us asked something about there was a musician called Keith, Kwef, Keith, and he said, and he wanted to ask Jarrett somebody about Keith, about this musician Keith, and Jarrett looked at him and said, I'm Keith, and the guy said, no, Keith, it's somebody Keith. And Jarrett said, I don't know anything about them. Why are you asking me about them? That's a ridiculous question. And sort of signed the album with just as if he had shit under his nose, And then Alan was up next, and Alan said, I don't want to ask any questions. Can I just get my CDs signed? And Jarrett never said anything to him, just signed the CDs, and Alan, we buggered off. But Jarrett was not happy about being asked to do more or meeting his fans, and then I thought, I don't have any Jarrett in my collection anymore, and I wouldn't have any, no, regardless of how good it is, because what a prick, what an absolute douchebag.
Yeah, he seems like that. I mean, I've never listened to him in an interview around that. I just took this off watching his performances, and like his body language and the way he sings while he's playing piano. He always comes across like someone who's on the spectrum, or
he probably is. I think he's a little bit sociopathic from my experience would be.
Yeah,
because he wasn't. It was nothing humble about that guy at all. He was very much up in your face, with his disdain for the fans.
Yeah, there's a musician here in Canada. I don't know how well known he is outside of Canada. Kim Mitchell. He had a band in the '70s called Max Webster.
Oh yeah, no, Max Webster. Yeah.
Yeah, so he's a well-known guitar player from the Toronto area, and when I was when I was in school going to be a radio DJ, I don't know if I told you that. Now that's what I went to college for. The second time I went to college was for broadcast journalism. I wanted to be a radio DJ, and I had this like apprenticeship or internship at one of the big rock stations in Toronto, probably the biggest station in Canada, called Q107, and he was the afternoon DJ because he had decided he wanted to work in radio, so he did the afternoon DJ for a few years in Toronto, and I was working with him, and he was the biggest prick I've ever had to deal with. And I thought, I could get that if you're at a concert and you don't want to meet your fans, you're not one of those people that likes to be asked the same question every night over and over again. But like we were in a coworker environment, you know, and I'm like looking to be like learn everything I can from all these DJs. And it was like the most positive experience I had with him is I think he thanked me once for getting coffee. You know, that he demanded the coffee. It wasn't like I decided I'm going to be a nice guy and get Kim Mitchell coffee. He was like, "Hey, you get me coffee."
Yeah.
You know, and it was like, "What? I'm not a fucking servant. I'm here to learn how to use a console and learn how to be a DJ." And he's like, "Well, the first thing you do is you get me coffee."
Yeah. That's get your priorities right, mate.
Yeah. You know, and my mom had a bad experience with him too. She saw him live with Max Webster back like on the Million Vacations tour, like in Toronto at like a small club. And he was in the bar during intermission, and Mom introduced herself to him and talked about how great his music was. And he basically went like, "Yeah, I know I'm great. Now leave me alone," kind of thing. Like, you know, which is sad, you know, because that's meets that back to that same thing you've said before, and I agree with you. Meeting your heroes is never a good idea. You know?
No, it's not. No, it's not. I wouldn't know what to do. I find that on the few occasions that I have been confronted with them, I never know what to do. I just sort of stare at them blankly. Did I tell you about my brief meeting with Don Preston?
No, that'd be a good one.
Yeah, I went to see the Grandmothers play in Edinburgh. So that was Jimmy Carl Black, Bunk Gardner, Don Preston. I think that was the original Mothers, and then they had this guy from Italy, whose name I used to have memorised and I've forgotten it, but he was a dead ringer for Frank Zappa, and he could play all Zappa's solos. Nice. He got sued eventually by Gail. Gail sued him for using the mustache in his promotional material because he was using the Imperial kind of, you know, mustache setup. And they were great that night. They were great. And I was hanging around after the gig because my friend was getting a late bus, so we were just hanging around. Normally I would leave. And so we're just it's a small venue, you know. It maybe holds 200 or 300 people at most if you cram them in. And there was Jimmy Carl Black wrapping up his own drums. They had no roadies. At all. They all had to do their own kit. And really? Don Preston was wrapping up his keyboard and stuff. And I'm standing there, sort of watching them. And there are these guys that have leapt out of the pages of history for me, you know. I didn't have posters of them on my wall, but if there had been posters of them, I would have had them, and they would have been on my wall. And there they were, you know, and I couldn't take my eyes off them. And obviously, Don Preston is obviously used to this because he's been in the business for years and years, and he's a little guy. He's very short. He's only about 5'2" or something. And he sort of came over to me and he just looked at me. And he just grinned, and I just grinned back, and I could see he nodded just like that and went, "Yeah, I know." And just walked past me, and I thought, that was Don Preston. And what I would have said to him if I'd had the gumption is, he was playing keyboards the way that I sometimes play keyboards. Now he's a much better keyboard player than me, obviously, but he does that crossover thing where you use your right hand to play the bottom and top notes of a figure, and you use your left hand steps over, like tapping on a guitar. And he was doing that to get his solos, and I was like, yes, I thought I was cheating, but it's actually okay because Don Preston does it. And he was great. They were great that night. In fact, my friend was not really a Zappa fan at all. He just came along because, you know, it was a gig, and he came away really impressed. He was like, "My God, that was brilliant." I said, "Yeah, I did try to tell you." Yeah, but they were good, and the guy who looked like Frank Zappa was brilliant.